Many Old Testament Bible passages mention a race of giants on the earth. Genesis chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. Deuteronomy 2, verse 11. They were also regarded as giants. Deuteronomy 2, verse 20. That was also regarded as the land of giants. Giants formerly dwelt there. Deuteronomy chapter 3. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. And so forth. There are many other scriptures that refer to the giants. Well, despite the numerous biblical references to giants, few modern-day Christians know anything about the subject. Two of my longtime friends are here today to discuss the subject in detail. Dr. Tom Horn is a successful author of numerous best-selling books. He's also the founder and co-host of Skywatch TV. Tom, welcome back to True News.
Hey, great to be back on the air with you again, Rick.
Yes, sir. It's been a while, but we're glad to have you here. And joining Tom is Steve Quayle. Steve hosted a daily radio talk show for several decades. He's also the author of numerous books about ancient subjects, including Genesis 6 giants. Steve, welcome back to True News.
Well, thank you, Rick. And it's like we get to today, the three of us get to talk about the headlines of the day. And the day is genetic manipulation. And what's fascinating is that all the myths and legends talk about the times now that we're coming into. And for the people that don't know, Tom and I independently, but directed by the same Holy Spirit, have been conducting our parallel research over decades. And what's fascinating today, Rick, we get to come on with you and share just the times that we're in, because we're talking about the days of Noah. Jesus warned us about these days, that just as in the days of Noah, so would the days be leading up to the coming of the Son of Man. So when we're talking about giants, we're talking about the merging, the pollution of the human genome by the fallen angels trying to make the promise that in the Old Testament, Genesis 3:15, and the seed of the Redeemer that would come, they're trying to nullify that and destroy all mankind with all of their technological shenanigans, all of their genetic manipulation, and all of their basically slander against the Christians and slander against the people who believe in the God of the Old Testament. And Tom, Tom's got some of the most fascinating stories to talk about, and actually events, because he's literally been to Mount Graham, where the Vatican has their observatory, and people have heard it's called Lucifer. That's an acronym, but they know exactly what they're looking for. And we just interviewed Tom for the newest episode of True Legends, the series, and the subtitle of that has always been, "They who control the past determine the future." And Tom, will you share wherever you feel led? May I just, Rick, turn it over to him so he can share with you just the astonishing preparation of planet Earth for an alien savior, just exactly what the book of Daniel talks about.
All right, go for it, Tom.
Well, I didn't know that was going to happen, but yay. Rick, as you know, because you interviewed me, it's probably been about 3 years ago now when we first went up to Mount Graham on this subject matter, where we had made this prediction that Pope Benedict was going to step down, Benedict XVI. And, at first, people all around the world were laughing at us. They were saying popes don't step down, they don't resign, they die in office, it's never going to happen. But we had our reasons, and we talked all about that back then, for making the prediction that Pope Benedict would not only step down, we said exactly the year and the month that he would step down. We said it would be in April of 2012. And when that date passed, and the Vatican, Benedict, nobody had made any kind of a formal declaration of his resignation, I thought, well, maybe we missed it, but we sure had a lot of confidence in it. And then, of course, February 28, 2013, the Vatican makes the announcement that Pope Benedict has resigned, and the same day they give an interview. Their El Observatorio Romano, their official media outlet, gives an interview with the New York Times in which they admit that Pope Benedict XVI had actually officially resigned in 2012 when he returned from a trip at the end of March, made it official internally and only to a handful of select members of the Curia, the Roman government, in April 2012. Well, when they made that announcement, I got to tell you, my phone line lit up, people all over the world, including from Rome, wanting to know who our insider at the Vatican was. And Rick, I told him, I said, if I had told them it was the Holy Spirit, that would have really confused them, right? They totally would not have got it. But it was while we were on the radio talking with you, Rick, and many others about this resignation of Benedict that people all over the world started emailing, and when these were talk shows where people could call in and ask questions, they started saying, yeah, but what do you make of the Vatican being out there now, saying so much about aliens? Because you guys might remember that in 2009, 10, 11, 12, the official astronomers and spokespersons for the Vatican, they were out there talking about how they wanted to baptize aliens. And then they ratcheted it up and said not only is it okay to believe in life on other planets, but to not believe in the possibility of life on other planets. That would be the heresy, because that would put limits on God's creative ability. And so you had Jose Funes Jr., who at that time was the head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group. You had Guy Consolmagno, who's now the new head of the Vatican Observatory Research Group. And Guy Consolmagno actually gave me 5 interviews with him via the internet from Rome when we went up to Mount Graham. So what am I saying? We've been on this quest now for 4 solid years, but it was after we went to Mount Graham in Arizona to try to get an answer, a legitimate answer, for why the Vatican was so heavily invested in the study of deep space. And was there really anything to what Father Malachi Martin had said years earlier on Coast to Coast AM when he said the Vatican's up there because they know there is something that is approaching the earth and it's going to be of the utmost importance in coming years? We really wanted to get behind all of that, but we did not know when we went up there would be a connection to the Nephilim, to the giants, to the subject matter of this interview that we're doing today. Because we went up there, we were given full access. I don't want to go back and repeat all that information from our interview earlier. I don't know if you have an archive. If people want to go back, maybe they can listen to those interviews we did then. We did see the Lucifer device. We were told everything that we wanted to know. But it was once we came down off of Mount Graham, and I was on I think I was on with Jim Baker or Sid Roth, one of those guys, and I said something. I said the reason that the Apache Indian, in particular, but other indigenous peoples, had joined environmentalists in Arizona in a lawsuit to try to stop the Vatican and NASA and Arizona State University from building that observatory on the top of Mount Graham. The reason they joined them was because they were there ahead of everybody else, and their forefathers and foremothers had lived and died on Mount Graham, and therefore it was something like a graveyard. It was holy ground, and they didn't want people up there with machines disturbing the mountain. I said that on television. Excuse me, I've had a cold for a while. And I was immediately contacted by a member of the Apache Nation. And here's what he wanted me to know. He wanted me to know that while what I had said was okay, good enough, that was not the point. The reason that the Apache had sued the Vatican and NASA to stop them from going up onto the top of that mountain was because Mount Graham is, in their worldview, one of the 4 holiest mountains in all of the world. Now, we've vetted that, and that's not only true for the Apache, it's true for all American indigenous people. Mount Graham is one of the 4 holiest mountains in all the world, and it is because it is what we would call, in our modern lingo, a stargate, a doorway, a portal, a specific geographic location on Earth through which entities have entered into and exited from Earth's 3-dimensional reality since the dawn of time. Well, when we learned that, I got to tell you, the conspiracy meter went off the Richter scale in my head about why now that mountain of all mountains became the place that the Vatican was willing to face a federal lawsuit in order to get on top of that mountain. Why not just move to another mountain? And but the other part of the story here is that when Moses was writing the Pentateuch, the very verse that you quoted a moment ago, Rick, Genesis 6:4, there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. While he was writing that in the Middle East, at the very exact same time, the Anasazi Indians in America were drawing petroglyphs on the walls in the four corners of the United States and below the base of Mount Graham that told exactly the same story. A story of a portal opening, giants coming through, 6 fingers, 6 toes, cannibalizing the American people, and they begin crying out to the great God of heaven who sends a universal flood. This is all early American history. Sends a universal flood, washes the bones of the giants up under the mounds of the hills. But it was a tremendous corroboration of the stories of the Old Testament. That, in other words, people who had no known method for communicating with one another at the same time in history were writing down the same story on opposite sides of the earth, and it involved these giants, the Watchers, the fallen Nephilim, and so on.
Well, Rick, what's interesting, what Tom just shared, parallel to that, the fascinating thing is that when Jesus spoke in Matthew 16, 18, and I say also unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock, the rock of faith, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The thing that people don't understand is that giants were designed by Lucifer through the fallen angel, through the sexual corruption of the fallen angels and the earth women. But the point I want to make is this. Well, Tom is hearing these Native American legends and writing about it and incorporating into his DVDs. I'm basically sending a team to Peru, and I'm sending them to they've already been sent, to do our True Legends series. What's fascinating, in 2005 I was on Coast to Coast talking about giants, because that was the first edition of my book, Genesis 6 Giants, or around that time, and I get contacted from an airman who's in Afghanistan, and he tells me the story of how a giant that was in a rather large cavern, well, we were fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. He was, we sent out teams to try and track him down, but they encountered a giant who basically, and I'm talking about a live giant in the 21st century, that basically killed the advanced scouting team and required if you will, a special forces and a special operations team to come in and get this giant, kill him. Well, they killed him and they take him down to the Bagram Air Force Base, and my friend was a pilot, and my friend flew him out. He's now become my friend, but at that time he said up until the time they flew out, he was flying in and out of Afghanistan for the military. He said he used to think I was crazy until they brought a giant red-haired, literally a giant who was red-haired, smelled horrifically, unlike anything they'd ever smelled in their life, 6 fingers, 6 toes, and he put his foot up against the giant's foot, and the giant's foot was somewhere around 4 to 6 times his foot. Now, this is interesting. So 2005 this happens. Now, fast forward a couple years ago, and this is where it ties in with what Tom's talking about. This same pilot is in a bar in New Mexico, and a Navajo elder comes up. And the Navajo elder starts singing and, doing his kind of like song chant that the Navajos are famous for. And the medicine man, a gray-haired individual, he stops. He looks at my friend, at the pilot, that's who I refer to him as, and he looks at him and says, "You have seen giants. The earth has swallowed up the giants. The giants are coming back." My friend, the pilot, had never met him. He had never talked to anybody because he didn't want people to think he was crazy. So then we're in the desert Southwest. Tom's in the desert Southwest. We are there. He's literally there. We're there in the interview. And what's fascinating, we fast forward to Rome. My film crew was over there a couple months ago, Tim Alberino and the cameramen and everything else that went into that. And they're meeting with, you're not kidding you, they're having secret meetings in the dark streets of Rome, and the subject of giants comes up and how much the Vatican has covered up about it. Now, why is this critical? Because the secret governments that rule the world are very aware of these beings, entities. Many of them are still in stasis, and that means obviously they're in a form of suspended animation. Fast forward to just a couple months ago now, and obviously we're talking 2016, and we see the Pope, we see the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill, and Obama all meeting in the area of Patagonia / the Antarctica. The Patriarch Kirill goes to supposedly Antarctica to open up the first Russian Orthodox Church there, which is really not the exact purpose of the mission. Now we come to the point where Antarctica is in the news. The whole planet, the Russians, Chinese, everybody seems to be headed towards the Antarctic. Prior to that, there were rumors out there that the U.S. military base deep underground that basically the Nazis have occupied since 1947 had done tunneling, massive tunneling from Antarctica under the ocean into South America. Now, why that's critical is when we started our documentary in Peru, the great Peruvian tunnels, which were known to the Catholic Church, were called the Chincana. Now, I don't speak Spanish very well, but I've learned how to pronounce that. And what's more fascinating than anything, and why this is critical, is the architecture under these tunnels was built by giants with technology that did not exist at the time of the Aztec, Inca, or Mayan Empire. Obviously in Peru it's the Incans. So we get one of the most famous guys. This all has to do with giants, but it also has to do, Rick, with your vision, and I want you to share that when I'm done in just a minute of saying this. We talked to different eyewitnesses in Peru, and now this will blow your mind. As I'm talking about this on the radio, I get a call and an email from a gentleman whose great-great-grandfather was responsible for hiding Hitler, Adolf Hitler, in a Peruvian underground citadel. If people do their homework, obviously read my book, Empire Beneath the Ice, they will find out that Hitler was obsessed with civilizations in the earth, under the earth, and basically the tunneling of them. The Aztec, Inca, and Mayans possessed no metal implements outside of gold, silver, and the precious metals they fashioned into jewelry. So therefore, all three of those empires, now we're talking about a very strange occult phenomenon here, all claimed that they were built by the giants who came from the east, who would also return. And obviously, you know, when Cortez and all the conquistadores showed up, well, they think this is a prophecy being fulfilled. Now, why is this critical? One of the toughest things for people to accept in the Old Testament, and this is a marvelous basic understanding, is when God told the children of Israel when they're going in the land of Canaan to kill every man, woman, and child. I personally, in all the years I've been witnessing, Rick, for 44 years to people, they invariably bring that up to me if they're familiar with the story. And they'll say to me, what kind of a loving God is that? And my answer is simply this. He who created mankind in his image and likeness was not about to allow the perversion or the destruction of his genetic plan for mankind. So now, everything that Tom writes about, I've written about genetic Armageddon, everything out there is to destroy mankind. And so what I find most fascinating is the overlap between Tom and I, our mutual investigations, our mutual film projects. Now, saying that is, we have a secret meeting in Rome. It's set up, okay? And it's set up, what's the chance that my film director gets to go to the Jesuit headquarters under a lot of security and scrutiny, and the gentleman that he's interviewing talks about the Pope having a secret meeting on Mount Graham and meeting with someone who came through the gate. Now, people try and dismiss Tom or me or you. You know this. Our critics look for anything. But we're in the Vatican headquarters interviewing a man who's very much a part of trying to expose what's going on in the plans for the alien deception. And lo and behold, he tells us and sets up a meeting with a very wealthy billionaire in Italy who said, do you know who basically funded Zecharia Sitchin and his works? Now, I've read all of Sitchin's works, okay? I agree with so many of his findings, not his conclusions. But the point is it comes right back to the true history of the world, the biblical history. And a lot of people say this, that this isn't relevant to Christians. Oh, it's the most relevant because Jesus said there's never been a time like it, nor would be again. And except the days be shortened for the elect's sake, there'd be no flesh left alive. Now, Rick, I know you've shared with me before, but I think in tying this together, will you share what the Lord showed you? I don't know if you've ever heard this, Tom, but it's remarkable.
Yeah, I will, but I can't let you not answer a couple questions here. Who funded?
Okay, yeah, no. I just think it's amazing because
I will. But who funded Zecharia Sitchin's work?
A very wealthy billionaire under the orders of the Vatican.
All right, and then you said that the Pope had a secret meeting at Mount Graham with a person or an entity that came through the gate. Obviously, you're not referring to the parking gate.
Well, obviously, I'm not referring to a toll gate, a parking gate, a sheep gate, a goat gate, and I'm not even referring to Watergate. I'm talking about a dimensional portal. A dimensional portal that Tom calls a stargate. And obviously the word star in Hebrew and in Greek, messenger, we're talking about the Pope met with, let's just call this, an entity that came through the gate.
Well, and by the way, I don't know if I've ever even told you this, Steve, but I negotiated this through Arizona State University so that people know you don't just get in a car and drive to the top of Mount Graham and jump out and say, we're here to meet the Pope. You know, way down off that mountain, there are very tall fences, and they are electrified, and they've got big notifications on them in multiple languages talking about all the horrible things they're going to do to you if you try to climb over that fence to get up to the top of that mountain. You absolutely cannot get up there, and there is a constant 24-hour-a-day police presence up there. They will arrest you and take you straight to jail. And even when you get to the top of Mount Graham, the only walkways you can be on have little cables, steel cables, that run alongside them with signs saying, do not step off the trail. You can't even step off the trail and walk into the forest. So they are really guarded about everything that goes on up there. But the day that we went to the top of Mount Graham, halfway up the hill, there's an old campground that had been built during the Roosevelt era when the New Deal, and they were creating jobs for people that were survivors of the Great Depression. And so we stopped there to have lunch. And while we were in there, the guy that works for the Parks Department that attends that facility, he had a little fire going in the fireplace, and we're just having a general conversation. Well, when he found out we were actually going to the top of Mount Graham, we had a guide from ASU that was going to get us there. He got really quiet, and he looked at us and he said, are you going up there because the Pope was up there the other day? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, when they brought him in by helicopter. And we didn't know anything about what he was even talking about, and so then he just let it go. And we didn't make nothing about it. We didn't include it in our book, Ex Vaticana. We didn't say a thing about it. But you didn't know that, Steve, that you know, this guy that works for the State Parks Department, he had asked us that very question in actually very early 2012 when we were finishing our research, that the Pope had been up there on the top of the mountain. Now, that's something later on, by the way, that it was either the Phoenix Gazette or the Arizona Republic. One of those had a little short article in which they referred to the Pope being up there. Something you said a moment ago, I'd love to just add one thing to before Rick tells us his story, if I can.
Please.
You said that, you know, people question this whole idea about why would you be talking about the giants and the watchers that came down in the ancient days. Look, I will go out on a limb here and tell you that I do not believe that you can understand the Old Testament, period. You cannot understand the Old Testament if you don't understand the story of the watchers coming down. You go to Psalms 82, and here's God standing among what it calls among the council of the gods. Read that in the King James Version. You don't even understand what's going on. When he divided the nations, he put lesser divine beings, angels, watchers, over the 70 nations of the earth, who then later became rebellious. They wanted to be worshipped. What happened with the story of the Watchers when they came down is, people say they wanted to cut off the birth line of the Messiah. I think that's partly maybe true, but that's just such a small part. What they literally wanted to do, if you understand the story, is they wanted to take dominion over the earth away from God, and through the introduction of a different kind of human-like mutation, a human-like species. That's literally the full story. If you understand the complete story, you understand this was a full-on affront against God. And in the Hebrew, there is a term called harim, which refers to all of the offspring of the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Samsunim. And this word harim means those who are dedicated to destruction. Think of them as literally the first ISIS of the early world, who were dedicated to wiping out anything that wasn't part of them. And if you understand what's going on there, then you understand why God tells Moses and Joshua and all of his other champions that they are to be in perpetual war against those who are dedicated to harim. This is the reason why when they go into Canaan, they go into the Promised Land, Joshua comes down off the mountain, comes back up onto the mountain, he says, we are more than able to take it. You quoted a scripture a moment ago, Rick, that says we were as grasshoppers in the eyes of our enemy, and so we were in their eyes. That was the evil report. But Joshua and Caleb said, let's go up at once and take it because we're more than able. This is a little tiny reflection of an eternal conflict that God's chosen people, the Hebrews, were to be in against those who were harim, those who were dedicated to the destruction of the divine order. That's why they set about to change all of the genetic makeup, not just of man, but of beast. Genesis makes it very clear that God sent the flood because all flesh, both man and beast, had been corrupted. This was an assault on God's divine order. It was an assault against God. It was an attempt to literally take dominion over the earth away from God and to wipe out everything that God had made. Now, once you understand what was going on, then when you read the Old Testament and you read those passages where these people are, where Saul sins against God because he refuses to wipe out entire populations of people, you understand. It's not because he's this genocidal, jealous maniac. It's because there was a corruption of the bloodline. And in order to preserve humanity and to save mankind, which God had made in his image, to save those who were made in the image of God, they had to wipe out those who intended to take dominion from God with a new form of polluted humanity.
Tom, if they had succeeded, then they would have interrupted the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. Mary would have been corrupted.
They would have done that too, but my point is that is only one piece of a much bigger and more complex issue. But that is part of it, certainly.